There are mirrors that behave like glass, and mirrors that behave like water. And then there are mirrors that breathe. The one kept in the back parlor of the Whitlock house was such a mirror, though few dared admit it aloud. Its frame was oak, blackened by the soot of decades, carved with motifs of ivy that never wilted. No matter how often the maids dusted it, the surface gave off a damp sheen, as though it were forever slick from unseen condensation. And if left uncovered at night, the glass seemed to move, not with the stillness of reflection, but with the shuddering pulse of something alive beneath its skin. The elders of the parish said it was unholy to sleep in a room where glass was left bare, for spirits drifted most freely when no curtain guarded the threshold between worlds. They told children to turn mirrors to the wall or shroud them with linen, lest they invite visitors into the house. And so in most homes, every mirror was veiled come twilight. Every mirror but one. It was said that in the Whitlock parlor, the covering cloth slipped by its own will. The first stories were murmured by children. They had dared each other to linger before the Whitlock glass in candlelight, to stare until their eyes ached from unblinking. And then, just when the silence was thickest, they claimed their reflections betrayed them. A boy named Ellis swore he saw his face close both eyes while his own remained wide open. Another girl, Margaret, whispered she had seen her mouth curl into a grin, though she herself had not moved her lips. These tales traveled like sparks along dry tinder, carried from hearth to hearth, until no child in the parish walked past the Whitlock house without quickening their step. The adults dismissed it as foolishness, yet many could not keep from lowering their gaze if they found themselves reflected in any surface nearby. For who could endure the thought that their likeness might choose to act without them? One evening, as the sun slid low and the cicadas sang their last burning notes, Mrs. Whitlock herself was said to have heard a sound rising from the parlor. Not the scuttling of rats, nor the groaning of timber, but a sound like breath-fogging cold glass. She approached with her candle, each footfall heavy against the warped wood. The mirror loomed ahead, its surface dim, swallowing the flame's glow instead of returning it. "Who's there?" she whispered. Not to the empty room, but to her own dim likeness wavering in the glass. The reflection leaned forward. She did not. The candle shook in her hand, dripping wax down her wrist, and she fled the room before the mirror could offer another reply. The Whitlocks, wealthy enough to keep up appearances, would not rid themselves of it. An heirloom, they called it, though none could recall from which ancestor it descended. Instead, they lived with its presence as one lives with a sickness, quietly, resentfully, waiting for it to pass on its own. But the mirror would not rest. Night after night, footsteps were heard upon the floorboards in that room, though the servants swore they found no one within. The cloth draped across its frame was discovered on the ground each morning, crumpled as though torn down by unseen hands. A visiting priest sprinkled holy water before it, but the droplets slid down the glass as though rejected, leaving no trace behind, and the children of the parish, God help them, still pressed their faces close to the window glass outside, daring each other to peek within. Some said they saw movement not their own, reflections turning their heads before the children themselves dared to flinch. "They blink when we don't," whispered Margaret again, this time pale with truth, not play. "They're waiting for us to close our eyes, so they may open theirs fully." No one laughed at her. Not anymore. The parish began to grow wary. Families covered their own mirrors with greater devotion, pinning cloth tight as though sealing a wound. Windows were shuttered earlier, candles burned lower, and no child was allowed out past dusk. Yet still the stories gathered. The Whitlock mirror had become a wound in the village, one that festered in silence, breeding fever in all who thought of it. On the 7th night of a long September, Ellis returned home pale and sweating. His mother found him sitting rigid at the table, staring at the wall. "What did you see?" she asked him, shaking his shoulder. His lips barely parted, his voice a broken rasp. "It smiled," he said. It smiled with all its teeth. By the year's end, no villager dared walk the road after dark, for they swore the glass of windows and rain barrels shimmered in ways that should not be possible. It was as if the Whitlock mirror had taught all glass to remember. Some whispered that the boy who feared mirrors had already been chosen, that he was marked by the first reflection that blinked when his eyes would not, and on certain nights, when the moon swelled round and heavy, villagers swore they could see tiny fingerprints pressed against the inside of the Whitlock glass, smearing down as if desperate to escape. The parlor grew colder, though the fire never ceased. Guests refused to enter. Servants began leaving one by one, whispering that they heard voices in the walls. Only the Whitlocks remained, sitting in silence at supper, pretending nothing had changed, pretending not to hear the quiet scratching from the mirror's backboard. The night before All Hallows, the last maid awoke to the sound of glass shifting in its frame. She crept to the parlor door, trembling, clutching her rosary. The mirror stood uncovered, its surface dark as a pond at midnight. And then, slow as a curtain parting, she saw it, two pale hands pressing outward, testing the skin of the glass like a child testing the womb. The hands curled into fists. A crack bloomed from the center of the mirror like a spider's web. The maid dropped her rosary. The parlor went black. And so the story passed down through the parish. The glass would not rest. The mirror had learned to breathe. Shadows are the birthright of every living thing, a proof of presence, a quiet tether to the world. But when Thomas Whitlock drew his first cry into the night of August 3, 1863, the midwives gasped not at the sound but at the absence. The lantern above flickered, its flame stretching across the walls, painting everyone in long black shapes against the timber floor. Everyone except the child. No shadow curled beneath his tiny form. No darkness stretched where his body lay. The women exchanged glances, faces pale beneath their bonnets, their hands trembling, though no one dared speak aloud what they saw. One dropped her scissors to the floor, and the metallic clatter sounded like a funeral bell in that stifled room. At first, they thought the light itself had betrayed them. Perhaps the lantern was too weak, perhaps the angle deceived. But when they turned the flame nearer, the absence deepened. The child's outline quivered faintly, like a reflection on water, as though something unseen strained to hold its place in the world. One midwife whispered, clutching the cross at her breast, "The devil marks his own." Another spat into her palm and hissed that no such words be spoken, while the boy still drew breath. The mother, pale and exhausted, begged to see her son. They placed him in her arms, though her eyes faltered when she noticed what they dared not name. She pulled him closer to her breast, as though warmth might bind him more firmly to the earth. "He is mine," she said in a cracked whisper. "He will walk as any other boy." But the midwives, grim-faced, wrapped him in cloth swiftly, as if covering something unfit for sight. Word spread quickly through the parish. Whispers carried from porch to porch, from field to field. The Whitlock child had no shadow. Some claimed such children were omens, born of cursed wombs doomed to walk between worlds. Others muttered that death itself had failed to claim him, leaving him half borrowed, half refused. By morning, mothers drew their children in closer. Men spat salt over their thresholds, and the church bells rang a little longer than they should have, as though tolling for a soul not yet departed. As Thomas grew, the absence did not heal. By his second year, he toddled about the Whitlock grounds, pale hair catching sunlight, bare feet stirring dust. But still the earth beneath him remained untouched. The grass did not bend darkly. The dirt did not shade. Wherever he went, he left no mark of shadow. Other children noticed first. They would stop mid-game, staring as he passed, their eyes following the ground more than the boy himself. "Where is it?" Ellis asked once, pointing to the soil at Thomas's feet. Thomas looked down, puzzled. "What?" "Your shadow," Ellis whispered. "Everyone has one. Even dogs, even trees. But you—" The words trailed into silence. Thomas, too young to understand, only laughed. But the others did not laugh with him. The older he grew, the more restless the parish became. Farmers swore their livestock grew skittish when Thomas neared. Candles guttered lower in houses where he stepped. Dogs bayed at him as though he were moonlight itself. By his 7th year, he had begun to notice. When he stood among his classmates in the one-room schoolhouse, he would see their shadows sway on the planks beneath the lamplight. He alone stood apart, brightness clinging to him in a way that seemed obscene. "Teacher," he asked once in trembling voice, "why don't I have one?" The schoolmistress froze, chalk dust spilling from her fingers. The room fell silent, as though the question itself had weight. She said only, "Some things should not be asked aloud, Thomas." But at night, the boy would stare at the mirror in his mother's chamber. He would trace the edges of his reflection, noticing how it quivered faintly, how the outline seemed to hover a fraction of an inch apart from the body it belonged to. Sometimes in the hush between midnight bells, he thought he saw another shape flicker just behind him, thin, stretched and waiting. But when he turned, there was nothing. Only the silent mirror, heavy with breath not his own. By his 10th year, the rumors grew darker. Parish women claimed to see strange shapes moving along the ground when he passed, as if his missing shadow had not vanished but fled, creeping along walls, curling behind fences, hiding just out of sight. And once, when Thomas lingered by the churchyard gate, an old gravedigger staggered back in terror, swearing the boy's absence blackened the soil. "He's hollow," the man muttered. "Not child, not saint, hollow." The Whitlocks kept their son close, but even their household strained. Servants refused to linger in the same room at dusk. Candles in the hallways burned low when Thomas walked past, as though smothered by a hand unseen. His mother still clung to him fiercely, but his father began to drink, muttering that no son of his would walk untethered, and Thomas himself began to fear. Fear not of death, but of mirrors. For though he cast no shadow by day, in the dim of night he sometimes thought he saw something, thin, grasping, waiting for him in the glass. One night he woke to find the lantern in his room guttering low. The walls seemed to stretch, dark shapes crawling across them where none should be. Slowly he turned to the floor beside his bed. There, for the first time, a shape stirred. Not quite his own, not quite human, but shifting like liquid tar. It lay there, twitching, reaching, almost touching his bare feet. Thomas froze, breath locked in his throat. And then the lantern went out. There are houses that groan like old bones, houses that sigh as timbers shift in their sleep. But the Whitlock house did not groan, nor sigh, nor settle with age. It scratched. The sound came each dawn, faint as moth wings rising from the parlor where the great mirror stood. To some it was no more than wood bending, a harmless protest of frame against glass. But to those who lingered, ear pressed against the wall, it was unmistakable. The deliberate drag of fingernails, steady, patient, pleading. At first, only the servants heard it. The cook swore she would not pass the parlor after cockcrow, for she claimed the scratching came most urgently, when the sky was grey with half-light. The butler muttered that it was vermin trapped behind the boards, yet no trap ever caught them. No sign of gnawed wood or droppings betrayed their presence. "Not rats," said the laundress one morning, her hands trembling over linens. "Rats don't beg." She left before nightfall and did not return. The Whitlocks themselves avoided the subject. Mr. Whitlock, weary and proud, told neighbors it was nothing but the house settling on its haunches. But in the candle-lit hush of evening, his hand shook when he poured brandy, and more than once he demanded the cloth be thrown across the mirror's face, with nails hammered to hold it. The nails bent by morning. The cloth always slid to the ground. By now the parish children no longer pressed their faces to the window glass, for they too had begun to hear it. They lingered at the edge of the yard at dawn, straining their ears, shivering though no wind passed. "It's calling," whispered Margaret, voice thin as a reed. "It's calling for him." She pointed toward Thomas, the shadowless boy, who sat alone beneath the sycamore staring at his hands. Thomas himself had begun to change. He grew pale, his eyes bruised by sleeplessness. In the silence of his room, he swore he heard voices seep up through the floorboards, whispers too faint to name yet too clear to ignore. They rose from the parlor below, a tide of murmuring that brushed against his thoughts like cold fingers. Sometimes they sounded like his own voice, sometimes like his mother's, and once, only once, he swore they spoke his name, Thomas. The sound was so soft it might have been breath-fogging glass. When he told his mother, she hushed him. "It's only dreams, my love, nothing more." But her hands trembled when she drew the curtains tight, and Thomas noticed she avoided the parlor altogether, skirting its doorway as though the air itself was poisoned. By the 11th night of October, the scratching had grown bolder. Guests dining with the Whitlocks stiffened at the sound, forks pausing halfway to lips. "What is that?" asked Reverend Holloway, his face pale as his collar. "The firewood," Mr. Whitlock said quickly. "It creaks." But as he spoke, the scratching swelled, louder now, a long dragging scrape as though something tested the glass from within. The Reverend set down his fork, his eyes wide. "No wood," he whispered, "ever begged to be let out. He left his supper unfinished, and by morning—" His sermon rang with warnings of windows to hell. The servants fled in twos and threes, leaving rooms uncleaned, meals half-prepared. By winter, the house was hollow save for its family, and the scratching grew constant, filling every dawn like a clock tolling its hour. Thomas alone dared enter the parlor. He stood before the mirror, heart thundering, staring at the dim glass. His reflection trembled faintly as though filmed by water. "Who's there?" he whispered once for a moment's silence, and then a whisper, faint, curling from the very surface of the mirror, soft as breath against skin. "Thomas." He stumbled back, but his reflection leaned forward. Its lips moved soundlessly, yet he understood the shape of the words. "Let me out." His throat went dry. His body screamed to run, but his feet would not obey. He felt as though some cord had been knotted between himself and the figure in the glass. His outline quivered, straining toward it. Then the scratching came again, violent, frantic, fingernails clawing from the backboard, wood splintering. Thomas cried out, the spell broken, and fled the room. That night his dreams curdled into visions. He saw himself standing before the mirror, his reflection smiling where he did not. Behind it, another shape pressed close, a thin figure, all ribs and shadow, its face blurred, its hands bloodied from endless scraping. It whispered with no mouth, "You were born for me." He woke with a scream, cold sweat drenching his sheets, and the faint sound of scratching echoing still. Though no dawn had yet broken, the house sickened under its presence. Paint peeled, wood warped, the fire struggled to burn. Even the clocks faltered, their ticking muffled as though smothered. Neighbors crossed themselves when passing, and mothers forbade their children from speaking Thomas's name. Yet the boy knew the truth. It would not stop until he answered. One morning, desperate, Thomas approached the parlor once more. He placed his hand against the glass, trembling. The surface was cold, slick, pulsing faintly beneath his skin. "Why me?" he whispered. The glass shivered. His reflection leaned closer, lips parting. "Because," it seemed to say, "you are hollow and I am waiting to be filled." The scratching surged, a cacophony of claws against wood, shrieking for release. Thomas tore his hand back, heart hammering. That night his mother found him sitting awake, staring at the darkened corner of his room. "Why don't you sleep?" she asked gently. "They'll come through," he whispered. His eyes were wide, fever bright. "They'll come through the glass." She gathered him close, though her own breath shook. "Not if we keep the mirrors covered," she said, though she did not believe it. And still, even as she held him, faint scratching rose from the floorboards beneath them. By the 12th dawn, the mirror's oak frame split, thin cracks running like veins through its surface. Neighbors passing in the early light swore they heard a chorus of voices, layered, pleading, weeping, calling one name again and again. Thomas. 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 That night he dreamed once more. The mirror stood before him, its glass swelling outward like a lung. From within, pale hands pressed, their nails split and bleeding. A face began to emerge, pressing against the surface until it bulged, mouth wide in a scream that made no sound. And as he watched, frozen, the glass began to give way. There are mothers who hush their children with lullabies, and there are mothers who hush their children with fear. Mrs. Whitlock did both. By the 4th month of scratching and whispers, she had grown gaunt. Her eyes ringed in grey shadows that belonged more to the grave than the living. She no longer trusted sunlight, no longer trusted the walls of her own home, and so she turned her needle to cloth. From dawn until the sun stood highest, she sat bent over her sewing frame, the hiss of thread sliding through fabric a ceaseless prayer. Curtain upon curtain she made, thick as burial shrouds, heavy enough to choke out even the brightest noonday light. She draped them across every pane of glass in the Whitlock house until the rooms dimmed like tombs. The air stale, heavy with dust, yet still she heard them. The sound came from the mirror in the parlor, yes, but also from the polished silver, from the copper kettle in the kitchen, from the faint shimmer of water in the wash basin. Tiny fingernails tapping, like beetles clawing to be free, like children begging at a locked door. She pressed her palms to her ears, rocking in her chair. Still the sound crept through her bones, a tick, a scrape, a pleading rhythm that would not cease. At last she set her sewing aside, her hands trembling. "Not the glass," she whispered to herself, over and over, as if speaking it aloud could bind it true. "It's only the house settling, only the house settling." But even as she said it, she saw it, a ripple pass across the covered mirror in the parlor, the shroud shifting as though something beneath had exhaled. By midday, she had sewn her last curtain. The rooms were suffocated in shadow, the windows veiled in folds of fabric thick enough to block even the southern sun. The Whitlocks ate by lamplight, their food tasteless, their silence heavier than stone. Mr. Whitlock grumbled of wasted hours and wasted cloth, but his voice quavered when the faint sound of tapping returned, rising from beneath the dinner plates. Thomas, pale and restless, lifted his fork but did not eat. "Mother," he whispered, "what if it's not the mirrors at all?" Her eyes snapped to him wide, unblinking. "What do you mean?" she asked, voice thin. "What if it's in me?" he said. His fork clattered to the plate, echoing like a bell. The silence that followed was worse than words. That night she stitched long after the others slept. The needle flashed in lamplight, the thread pulling tighter, faster, as though she could seal every gap in the world if only she worked hard enough. But her hands bled, her eyes burned, and still she sewed. When the clock told midnight, she looked up and froze. The curtains she had hung in the parlor stirred, not from breeze. The house was still as a coffin, yet they trembled, swelled outward, as though something behind them pressed its hands against the cloth. She staggered forward, clutching the scissors. "Stay back," she whispered. Though her voice cracked like dry wood, the fabric pressed again. Fingers, 5 distinct bulges dragging downward, and then the faintest sound. A voice muffled through cloth, childlike, pleading, "Let me out." Her scissors dropped clattering to the floor. She stumbled back, hand to her mouth. Her sewing, the very shrouds she had made to protect them, had become the only skin between her family and the thing that begged. The fabric sagged. The handprint sank away. The room fell silent, but she did not sleep again. In the days that followed, she grew frantic. She sewed not only curtains but coverings for every reflective surface. Sheets were hung across picture frames, linens stretched across polished wood. Even bowls and plates turned face down. The house became a mausoleum of cloth, every corner draped, every shimmer smothered. Still she heard it. The tapping grew sharper, insistent. Not from the mirrors alone now, but from the very walls, as though the house itself had learned to echo the plea. One afternoon, as the sun burned high above the veiled windows, she sat in her chamber, stitching with a fury that bordered madness. Her breath came ragged, her fingers raw. The room was silent save for the scrape of needle through cloth. Then, tap. She froze. The sound had come not from the parlor, not from the walls, but from the small hand mirror at her sewing table, the one she had forgotten to cover. Its polished surface trembled faintly, as though something beneath stirred. Tap, 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 her throat closed. Slowly she reached for the mirror, intending to turn it face down. But as her fingers brushed the frame, she saw them, nails pale and sharp, dragging across the inside of the glass. A whisper rose, soft as breath fogging a window. "Mother." She dropped the mirror. It did not shatter. Instead, it slid across the floor and came to rest against the base of the curtain. For a moment, she swore she saw a pale face swimming just beneath its surface, lips curling into a smile that was not hers. That evening, she nailed boards across her chamber door and stitched the last curtain tighter, sealing every inch of glass. She sat in her chair, rocking, whispering to herself, but the sound did not stop. It rose louder, scraping, pleading, crawling from every corner of the room, from the frame of the covered mirror, from the polished silver scissors in her lap, and then from just behind her ear came a whisper that was not air but weight. "You cannot sew me shut." The lamp guttered. The curtains swelled outward. From beneath the fabric a hand pressed, thin, long-fingered, its nails torn, its skin blackened as if rotted. The cloth strained against it, threads snapping one by one. Mrs. Whitlock pressed her bleeding hands to her face and screamed. And somewhere in the house, Thomas stirred awake, staring at the wall where no shadow lay. The sound of tearing cloth carried through the halls. Some children are born beneath a blessing, and some beneath a shadow. Elias Whitlock was born beneath both. From his earliest days, the house whispered around him. Curtains swayed when no breeze stirred, mirrors dimmed when he drew near, and silver turned cloudy when his small hands touched it. But it was not until his 10th summer that the others began to notice what the water had long known. Elias cast reflections that were not his own. It began beside the creek that split the Whitlock land, a thin black vein that sang only at dusk. The boy would wander there barefoot, his feet sinking into the mud. dragonflies whirring like tiny saints around him. And when he leaned over to peer at the rippling current, it was not himself he saw. The water answered him with another boy, a boy whose smile stretched too wide, whose eyes shone too dark, whose lips moved though Elias said nothing. At first, he thought it a trick of light, a shimmer of current. He closed his eyes, turned away, but when he looked again, the boy in the water grinned still. "Do you not know me?" the lips asked without sound. From that day, Elias avoided the creek at noon when the sun burned brightest, for that was when the reflection was sharpest, clearest, undeniable. He learned to walk quickly past, eyes lowered, never pausing to drink. But even when he averted his gaze, he could feel it watching him, the not him, rippling, smiling, waiting. At night, when he closed his eyes, he saw the face again. Not his own, but near enough to fool any careless glance. And always smiling, always Mrs. Whitlock, gaunt from sleeplessness and cursed by her curtains, began to notice her son's strange silences. "Why will you not look into the water, Elias?" She asked one twilight, her voice thin as moth wings. He lowered his gaze, clutching at the hem of his shirt. "It smiles when I do not," he whispered. She stared at him, her lips trembling. She wanted to hush him, to soothe him with gentle denial, but she could not. For in her heart, she remembered the tapping mirrors, the voices in the cloth, the hand that pressed against her sewn curtain. Her son's words were not madness. They were inheritance. The villagers whispered too. Elias's cousin swore she saw him standing on the far bank of the creek, smiling, even while he sat silent at the supper table. A farmer claimed the boy's face rippled up from the well, grinning before the water stilled, and children dared one another to walk past him, muttering that Elias was split, half in the flesh, half in the stream. Elias heard them. He said nothing. But at night he pressed his palms to his eyes until stars burst in the dark, whispering, "I am me, I am me, I am me." And yet, he no longer believed it. One late summer dusk, when the air hung heavy and gnats swarmed in clouds, Elias found himself again by the creek. The curtains in the house had stifled him, the whispers had driven him out, and his feet carried him back to the water despite his prayers. The creek lay black and glassy, still as a mirror. He tried to walk past, eyes averted, but something caught him. Movement, a shiver of current, or perhaps the pull of the thing that wore his face. Against his will, he looked down. The other boy stood waiting, but tonight, he did not smile. Tonight, the reflection's lips moved, forming words that trembled through the water, faint but sharp as broken glass. "It is almost time." Elias staggered back, his foot sliding in mud. The water rippled, distorting the boy's face, but when it stilled again, the not him only stared, wide-eyed, unblinking. The boy ran. He ran through the fields, heart pounding, the long grass lashing his legs. He did not stop until the Whitlock house rose before him, its windows shrouded, its eaves sagging like tired shoulders. When he burst through the door, his mother clutched him, trembling, demanding to know what he had seen, but he could not speak. His lips refused, as though his tongue no longer belonged to him. That night, as he lay in his narrow bed, Elias dared one glance into the small bowl of water at his bedside. His mother had left it for washing. The surface shivered, though the air was still, and there he was, his other self. Smiling again, this time Elias whispered hoarse, "What do you want?" The lips beneath the surface stretched into a grin that seemed to split the reflection's face. "To walk where you do, to breathe where you breathe, to be seen when you are not." Elias hurled the bowl against the wall. Water splattered, the surface broken, the face gone, but he did not sleep again. In the hours before dawn, he heard the sound of dripping water, though no basin stood near. He felt the weight of eyes pressing through the dark, and when the first weak light filtered through the curtains, he saw it, a small wet footprint at the foot of his bed, only one. His breath caught, his chest tightened. Slowly, he lifted his gaze to the mirror on the far wall, forgotten, uncovered. In its dim glass, his bed was reflected, but not him. The bed lay empty. And from somewhere behind the silver surface, a child's laugh bubbled up, soft, rippling, wet. The sound that followed was not quite laughter, not quite human. The mirror shivered. The curtains stirred, and Elias understood. The reflection no longer waited in the creek, it had crossed over. It was not thunder that woke the town that Sunday morning, but the sound of glass breaking in unison, like 1,000 screams sealed in silver, loosed all at once, from the richest drawing rooms with gilt-framed looking glasses to the humblest cabins with warped hand-me-down panes. Every mirror in the parish cracked in the same breath. A great shudder passed through the earth, faint as the toll of a buried bell, and then came the cold. Mist bled from the wounds in the glass, curling across floors, seeping beneath doors, rising like incense from a mass no priest would dare sanctify. The villagers gathered in silence. No one rang the church bell. No one called the hour. They moved as if beckoned by a will older than their own, drawn to the square where their fear might find companionship. Faces pale, lips trembling. They spoke only in half-breathed fragments, mine cracked from crown to chin. And when it broke, the eye looked back at me. Not my eye, not mine. Children clung to their mothers' skirts, whispering of things they'd glimpsed in the instant before the glass split, their reflections smiling, though they had screamed, or weeping, though they had not moved. One girl swore she saw a hand pressing outward from the inside of the mirror, as if something had been waiting, clawing at the silver, begging release. But when the crack came, the hand was gone. Only mist remained. The minister, pale as the rest, mounted the church steps. His Bible trembled in his hands, the words on its pages fluttering like moth wings in the wind. This is no doing of heaven," he said, voice faltering. "No saint, no angel, no holy host." His voice broke, and he did not finish. For even he had seen it, that flash of otherness behind his own face as the mirror above his wash-basin split. Their grin, impossibly wide, splitting his reflection's cheeks before the silver bled open. By noon, every house stood with curtains drawn. Windows were covered, glass hidden beneath cloth or wood. The villagers walked with eyes lowered, careful not to glance into wells or still water, or the shine of a polished pot, for whispers had begun to spread, riding low and fevered through the mist. The mirrors were not broken. They were opened. That night, silence ruled the town. No dogs barked, no children cried, only the creak of boards and the sigh of wind through gaps in shutters. Yet beneath that hush, another sound grew. From the empty houses, from the curtained parlors and shuttered kitchens, came faint, steady scratching. A chorus of fingernails dragging across glass, everywhere at once, scratching that rose, stopped, and rose again, as if something tested the boundaries between here and there. The sound carried on until midnight. Then, as if at a signal, it ceased. At dawn, the bravest among them gathered again in the square. Their eyes were sunken, their breath short. Each knew the others had heard it too, though none wished to confess. Mrs. Aldridge, her voice breaking, whispered, I saw my Henry last night. Her husband had been dead 3 years. He was in the glass of the cupboard door. He called me nearer. But his face was all wrong. Others murmured agreement. Names of the dead spilled into the morning mist. Children, mothers, husbands, long buried and gone. All seen, all calling, all waiting. And still no one dared step close to glass. Elias Whitlock, pale as milk, stood with his mother at the edge of the crowd. The boy's eyes never lifted, but he listened. And he understood better than the rest. For he had long known that reflections were not loyal. He could feel his other self watching now, pressing close to whatever veil had been thinned by the Sabbath's shattering. He felt it breathing in time with him, felt it smile when he did not, and he knew the mirrors had not cracked by chance. They had been called. By nightfall, courage broke. The townsfolk burned their mirrors. One by one, they dragged them into the square. Splintered frames, shattered panes, shards still misting like cold breath. Flames leapt high, devouring wood, warping silver. But the glass did not scream as it melted. It laughed, not with sound, but with the flicker of light bending on every broken piece, each shard flashing with grins that were not their own. The villagers turned their faces, covered their ears, but still the laughter spread, low, rippling wet. When dawn came again, the ashes of the burned mirrors lay black in the square. Yet within the soot, half-buried, glinted slivers of unbroken silver. Children poked at them with sticks. Some swore they saw eyes peering up from beneath the ash. Mrs. Whitlock dragged Elias away, her hands trembling, whispering to him as though he already knew. "We cannot kill what hides in glass. We can only cover it, pray it stays covered." But even as she spoke, Elias felt a cold mist curling at his ankles. The ashes breathed. The shards shifted, and from somewhere deep below the square, muffled by stone and earth, came the faint, unmistakable sound of glass splintering once more. And in that moment, Elias knew the mirrors were not destroyed. They were multiplying. Some boys outgrow their clothes, some their voices, some their innocence. But Elias Whitlock outgrew his reflection. It happened slowly, like a sickness settling in the marrow. At first a tilt of the chin in the glass that was not quite his. Then a hand raised a heartbeat after his own. Then lips curling into a smile when his remained still. The small betrayals multiplied until on his 13th year, the truth revealed itself. The boy in the mirror was taller. One evening, as twilight sank into the rafters of the Whitlock house, Elias lit a single candle and turned toward the parlor mirror his mother had forgotten to shroud. The air around it pulsed cold, though no window was open. He leaned close. His chest rose and fell. His lips parted with a trembling breath. The reflection leaned closer still, its shoulders higher, its arms longer, its eyes deeper in their sockets, as if carved from shadow. The difference was unmistakable now. It was no longer him. It was older. The candle guttered. For a moment, the flame's glow fractured the glass, and Elias saw more than height. He saw hunger. The reflection's lips began to move. Slowly, deliberately, with a lag that stretched each syllable into something unbearable. Lie. He froze. His name trembled in that silver mouth, though no sound reached the room. The shape of the letters felt like hooks pulling across his soul. Elias stumbled back, clutching his chest, his breath sharp as a gasp. "No," he whispered. "Don't say it." The reflection's grin widened, stretching too far across its face, the lips peeling back over teeth that glistened wet in the candlelight. "Elias." He smothered the candle. The room fell into darkness, but the mirror did not darken. It glowed faintly, as if lit from within, and in that glow the taller figure raised its hand, palm outward, beckoning. The glass rippled like black water under its touch. Elias swore he heard a faint tapping, the same fingernails that had haunted the town since the Sabbath of shattered faces. The next morning, his mother found him pale, his lips bloodless, staring at the mirror though a quilt had been nailed over it. His hands shook as if chilled from within. "You must not look anymore," she hissed, kneeling to clutch him. "Do you hear me? Whatever it promises, whatever it shows, it is not yours," Elias whispered, his voice raw. "It knows my name." Her face drained. She pressed the quilt tighter to the frame, as though cloth alone might bind the thing that spoke. But in her heart, she knew names had power, and once spoken by what was not human, they could not be forgotten. The villagers, too, began to murmur of reflections that no longer obeyed. One woman swore her shadow bowed when she did not. Another claimed her face in the wash-basin, mouthed curses, in a voice she had never spoken. But Elias's burden was worse, for the stranger in the glass was not content to mimic. It grew each day taller, each day older, each day closer to stepping where Elias stood. One night the dream came. He saw himself in a long hallway lined with mirrors, each surface veiled in frost. As he walked, the veils thinned and he glimpsed faces, his own but altered. One was eyeless, another toothless. One wore his face upside down, another twisted into a grin that split ear to ear. At the end of the hall, a single mirror stood uncovered, and there waiting was the taller Elias. "Say it," the stranger whispered, though no mouth moved. "Say the name. The one before yours, the one beneath." Elias awoke with blood on his tongue, though he had bitten nothing. From that night forward, he would not sleep without turning his face to the wall. But even then he felt the pull, the weight of eyes pressing from behind. One dawn, unable to resist, he dared one glance. Just one. The taller reflection pressed its palm flat against the glass, and Elias felt the pressure against his chest, as though through skin and bone. Then its lips moved again, slower than before, dragging the syllables like chains. "The name is not yours. It was mine first." The mirror quivered. The quilt nails groaned in the frame. Mrs. Whitlock rushed to drive them deeper with the back of a spoon, praying under her breath, tears streaking her hollow face. But Elias only stared. His body trembled. His mouth opened unbidden, and though his throat ached, though his soul screamed to remain silent, another voice answered through his lips, low, wet. "Ancient, I am not Elias." The glass did not crack. It swelled, bulging outward like a sheet of skin ready to split, and as his mother screamed and fled the room, Elias's reflection leaned closer still. It was no longer beckoning, it was stepping forward. The Whitlock house did not greet the dawn. Every other dwelling on that Alabama road bent to the will of morning, windows bright with sun, wood warmed to a soft gold, shutters rattling as the heat grew. But not this house. Its windows filmed white, as if smoke pressed thick behind the glass. The walls groaned, though no wind stirred. The light died at the threshold, as if it were a living thing forbidden to cross. Neighbors, passing at a distance, whispered prayers beneath their breath. They said it was the boy. Elias had not been seen in 3 days. Mrs. Whitlock claimed he was ill. That fever kept him confined, but her words rang hollow, her face pale as a washed shroud. For at night, sounds spilled from the house, long, ragged cries that began in a boy's pitch and ended too deep, too long, as though they came from a throat no child possessed. Not screams, muttered old Mr. Callahan, gripping his pipe with white-knuckled hands. The walls scream. The boards scream. The house's breath itself carries it, and in hushed voices the neighbors agreed. For when the cries rose, the very timbers of the Whitlock house quivered, shutters bucked, nails groaned. It was as though the building itself had taken the boy inside, swallowed him, and now choked on his name. Inside, Mrs. Whitlock staggered through her dim halls, lantern clutched tight, though even the flame flickered low in defiance. Curtains clung heavy to the glass, yet light seeped not at all. Outside the sun shone bright. Inside it was dusk eternal. She pressed her ear to the walls, trembling. "Elias," she whispered. The wood trembled, carrying a moan. Not a boy's cry, not a man's. Something stretched between, dragged thin as a violin string. Her knees buckled. "God help me." "That's not your voice." The walls pulsed under her palm, like a living chest breathing slow, deliberate breaths. On the third night, she woke to scratching at her bedroom door. "Mother," came the voice. She sat upright, lantern trembling. "Elias," a pause. Then lower, wetter, drawn out, "Mo there." The latch rattled. The wood groaned. She staggered back, pressing herself to the far wall as the knob turned through no hand should reach it. "Please," she whispered into her skirts. "If you are my son, speak as my son." But what answered was laughter, thick, choked, spilling from the boards, the ceiling, the floor beneath her feet, not from the throat of a boy. From the throat of a house, the neighbors dared no visit, but they saw. They saw the curtains pulse outward, as if the windows themselves exhaled. They saw cracks spread along the foundation, leaking a pale, cold mist that coiled across the grass. They saw shadows at the windows when no one moved inside, and some swore they heard Elias calling, not from the house, but from the glass. "He calls from the window panes," murmured Mrs. Callahan, clutching her rosary. "But it ain't him no more, too tall, too long." The others told her to hush, but their eyes betrayed the same dread. One morning, when the sun was highest, Mrs. Whitlock dragged a chair into the parlor and faced the shrouded mirror. The quilt nailed over it trembled, bulging outward as if pressed from within. "Why do you torment us?" she whispered. "What are you?" The cloth quivered. The nails squealed. From behind the quilt came a slow, deliberate knock. Once, twice, 3 times. "Mo there." She fell to her knees, clutching her chest. "You are not my child." And in answer, the quilt split straight down the middle, the nails groaning loose. Behind the torn cloth, the mirror gleamed. In it stood Elias, taller, older, lips curling in a smile too wide. He beckoned with one hand, the other pressed flat against the glass. "Let me in." That night, the neighbors woke to screams that shook the rafters. Windows burst outward in a shatter of smoke and mist. Curtains tore loose and flew across the yard like banners of surrender. And above it all, a cry rang, not Elias, not Mrs. Whitlock, but the house itself, roaring, groaning, a howl of splintered beams and bleeding glass. When silence fell, the house stood dark, but in the dawn that followed, the sun still would not touch its walls. The mist clung thicker, and through the warped windows a shape moved, tall, pale, smiling. By evening, the villagers gathered once more at the square. They spoke not of entering, not of helping, but of burning. Yet as they debated, a child pointed. The Whitlock windows had lit from within. Not lantern light, not firelight. A glow pale as moonlight, flickering with the pulse of breath, and in that glow faces pressed against every pane. Dozens of faces, each one Elias, each one smiling. The graveyard air held the stillness of a throat waiting to scream. No birds perched upon the iron fence, no insects hummed among the weeds. Only the hollow wind carried through the cypress trees, dragging with it the whispers of the town, of the Whitlock house, of the child that was and was not a child. And there, among the leaning stones, a coffin was lowered into the earth, empty, or so the priest swore when pressed, his trembling hands betraying him as he clutched the Book of Rites. The mourners gathered in black, eyes downcast, though none dared weep too loud. They were not sure for whom they stood. Elias, Mrs. Whitlock, the house itself? No body lay in the pine box, and yet the villagers pressed close to the pit, compelled by something deeper than grief. Old Mrs. Callahan muttered into her kerchief, "Best bury what can't be carried. Best bury the shadow if not the flesh." Her husband hushed her, though his lips were pale, his pipe unlit, and still as the coffin sank, a soil crumbled along the edges. Many swore they saw it, a pale hand thin as porcelain, pressing upward from beneath the lid, fingers curling, begging. Some gasped. Some fell silent. Some, those nearest, turned their backs, unwilling to name what their eyes betrayed. The priest's voice quavered over the verses. Ashes to ashes, but the earth shuddered beneath his boots. Dust to dust. The coffin rocked once in the grave. The ropes groaned. The pallbearers swore their palms burned with a cold that travelled through the hemp, and then silence. Thick and waiting, as though the grave itself listened. Among the mourners, a child whispered, "Mother says you can't bury a house." Heads turned sharply. The mother clutched her daughter's hand, face stricken. "Hush." But the child spoke louder as though in a trance. "Mother says it's in the wood, in the glass. You can't bury what breathes walls." The priest snapped his book shut, the echo of leather a gunshot in the stillness. Enough! But in the pit the coffin shifted again, and this time they all saw it. The lid bulged upward, straining, as though ribs pressed against it from inside. "Cover it," barked Mr. Callahan, his voice cracking. "Cover it now!" The gravediggers flung dirt fast, soil cascading like dark water. But the thumps from within grew louder, rhythmic, beating, like a second heart pulsing beneath the earth. One mourner dropped to her knees, clutching the grave's edge, eyes wide with devotion or madness. "He lives. Elias lives. We bury him alive." "No," hissed another, dragging her back. "It ain't him. Don't you know his voice? Don't you hear it?" And indeed, beneath the thud of fists, came whispers seeping through the seams of the coffin. Not one voice, many, all speaking in unison, rising and falling like waves. There. The word turned chorus, spilling like smoke from the soil itself. The priest dropped his book, pages scattering like startled birds. He fell to his knees, muttering prayers too fast, too broken, but the mourners could not look away. For even as the coffin was buried beneath earth, the bulge beneath the lid grew, straining upward. Soil cracked, shifting, spilling back into the pit, as if the grave refused to keep its burden. And then, silence again. Utter silence. Only the wind moved, tugging at veils, bending the weeds. The coffin stilled. The earth smoothed. The voices ceased. Some sighed. Some crossed themselves. Some wept relief, but the child, small, pale, still staring, spoke once more. "Look," and all turned, horrified as the ground around the grave darkened, not with water, not with shadow, but with handprints. Pale, damp, stretching outward in every direction, pressed up from beneath the soil. 1 hand, 2, 10, 20. They multiplied, each one small and white, flattening the earth, reaching toward the mourners' feet. Some screamed. Some stumbled back. Some could not move at all. The priest, wild-eyed, seized his dropped book and shouted in broken tones, "The grave is shut. By Christ's blood, the grave is—" But he froze, words dying on his lips. For at the head of the grave, where no coffin lay beneath, the earth cracked apart, slowly, gently, as though a door opened, and from that fissure, pale mist uncoiled. Within it faces stirred. Elias's face, dozens of them. Each one smiling, each one mouthing the word the mourners had heard in their dreams. Mother. The villagers fled then, stumbling through the graveyard gates, shrieking prayers, cursing the Whitlock name. But some did not flee fast enough, for as the mist thickened, the hands beneath the soil reached higher, longer, stretching upward as if yearning to be pulled into the world again. And at the center of it all, The coffin lid split in two with a sound like ribs breaking. What lay within was not flesh, not bone, but something pale. Something that pressed outward like clay still wet. Something that smiled as though it knew each mourner's name. As the last fled down the lane, the church bell tolled of its own accord, deep and hollow, though no rope swung it. The sound carried for miles, and when it ceased, the graveyard was empty of mourners, but not empty of eyes. For at each gravestone, faces pressed upward from the soil, waiting, patient, pale. The house was dead long before it was empty. Its timbers sagged, its windows wept with mildew, and ivy clutched the porch like a hand refusing to release its prize. The villagers no longer walked the road that passed its gate. They crossed the field instead, trampling their own crops rather than risk brushing against its shadows, for they swore the house leaned when no wind stirred, as though it listened. Yet within its parlor, where dust lay in drifts like burial shrouds, one thing remained untouched, a single mirror unbroken. The glass was not clean, but it was whole. While every other pane and frame in that cursed house had fractured into spiderwebs of ruin, this mirror held its skin. Its surface was dark, deeper than reflection should be, as though it drank light rather than returned it. Those who dared approach swore they felt a chill ripple from it, a current colder than water. And if one lingered too long, the surface would shift, subtle at first like heat haze, then rippling as though disturbed by a hand from beneath. It was said the boy waited there, the one born without a shadow, not behind the glass, not inside it, but in the place where reflection ended and silence began. A group of men once tried to smash it. They entered with hammers and axes, laughing too loudly, boasting that no pane of silvered glass could withstand them. But when they swung, the metal rang as though against stone. Their blows bent their tools, yet the mirror remained unmarred. Devil's trickery, one spat, his voice shaking. The others nodded, but none would meet the glass again. For as they turned to leave, they saw their own reflections still staring forward, faces pale, eyes blackened, mouths opening wider, wider. Though their living bodies spoke not a word, they fled and never returned. By night, neighbors claimed they saw a faint glow from the parlor window, though no lamp was lit within, a glow that pulsed like breath. Some swore they heard weeping. Others claimed the laughter of a child, and one old woman, half mad with fever, whispered that she saw the boy's eyes watching from the glass, not at her, but through her, as though marking the day her place would be his. Inside the parlor, dust lay heavy. Chairs sagged with rot, wallpaper curled into brittle tongues, and a clock had frozen its hands at midnight decades before. Yet the mirror's frame gleamed faintly, polished by no hand. Its surface stirred whenever footsteps neared, as though eager. Villagers told their children, never stand before it. Never let your eyes linger. Never let its gaze fix upon you. For those who did were never quite the same. A farmhand, young and reckless, entered once on a dare. His friends waited outside, jeering, throwing stones at the shutters. He stood before the mirror and laughed, striking poses, flexing his thin arms, but then he frowned. His reflection did not move with him. The figure in the glass smiled slowly, lips stretching too wide until teeth showed like shards of porcelain. The boy in the mirror tilted his head, though the farmhand did not, and then the glass darkened, swallowing the reflection until only the farmhand's eyes remained, wide, trembling, looking out from the other side. When his friends finally grew brave enough to search, they found only his hat dropped in the dust. The mirror stood whole, its surface gleaming faintly, and within it a new face peered out, mouth open in a silent scream. Years passed. The house sank deeper into rot. Trees swallowed the roofline, moss carpeted the steps. But the parlor never dimmed. The mirror endured. Children dared each other to peer through broken shutters. Some claimed they saw their own future faces staring back, gaunt, hollow-eyed, marked by griefs not yet lived. The others swore they saw nothing at all, only darkness too thick to be glass, and yet each who looked carried something back with them. Dreams of drowning in silver pools, voices whispering their names at night, the steady scrape of fingernails on wood. The last villager to enter was an old preacher, convinced he could banish the evil once and for all. He carried holy water and spoke prayers as he crossed the threshold, his voice breaking but defiant. He raised his hand, flinging droplets across the parlor. The walls hissed as though in pain, the wallpaper shriveling to ash where each drop fell. But the mirror did not flinch. The preacher approached, Bible trembling in his grasp. By the Lord's hand, "You are broken," he declared. The mirror stirred. The surface rippled outward, pulling his reflection into 100 writhing fragments. His voice faltered, for in each fragment the boy's eyes stared back. The preacher dropped to his knees, gasping as his reflection stepped out of time with him, mouthing words he had not spoken. His prayer collapsed into sobs. When the villagers came to check on him days later, they found only his Bible on the floor, pages blank as if the ink had been drunk away. And in the mirror's depths, a new figure whispered sermons with no sound. They say the mirror waits still. Its silver has not tarnished. Its frame has not rotted. Though the house slouches into earth and vine, that parlor remains untouched, lit always by a faint, impossible glow. Step inside, and you may feel its pull. Stand before it, and you may see him, the boy, tall now, his face calm, his lips moving too slowly. He will call you by name, though you never gave it. He will wait for you to answer, and if you do, the glass will ripple like water. A hand, pale and cold, will rise to meet yours. And somewhere outside, in the night that does not sleep, a villager swears they hear faint scratching on their own window pane, tiny fingernails tapping, asking to be let in.